truly blessed to have you in our lives. I'm Jim Paquette, Leon's oldest son. The last 9 years of Leon's life was a bit of a struggle. He had suffered a major stroke that took away his speech and most movement on his right side. As the years progressed, so did his struggle. My mom was a great caregiver and was often told that Leon was lucky to have her. This was obviously true and spoke to the deep level of love they shared. But my mom's response would always be that he would have done the same for her and she was lucky to have him. Every child thinks their dad is Superman, but every Superman has their kryptonite. My dad had three I'd like to share. He struggled with singing, telling jokes, and driving. Singing, Leon was tone deaf and could never remember the correct words for the song. Very two important attributes when belting out a tune. I guess the ability or inability to sing is contained in the chromosomes of a gene that my family says I was unfortunate enough to inherit. Leon sang every day. Telling jokes, Leon enjoyed a good joke. He loved the bad ones even better. The issue he had was his execution and the structure of telling the joke. He started with the punchline, and because he had enjoyed the punchline so much when he had heard it, he would just start laughing. The problem was that everyone would end up laughing at him laughing. So he must have thought he executed the joke telling flawlessly. So he continued to tell jokes. But Leon's biggest kryptonite was his driving. There are far too many stories to share here, most of which can be told by the grandkids. You see, he and my mom ran the Paquette Daycare Center for my family and my sister's family. As our kids grew up, my mom was in charge of the home base, while the duty of transportation fell in Leon's lap. The best part of this daycare was that it was free and open 24/7. The grandkids loved it because it came with all the unconditional love and teaching they could absorb. Besides the daycare operation, my dad was a one-man volunteering staffing company that any family or friend could call upon to assist in completing any project. Projects that ranged from building decks, moving railroad ties for gardeners, to fixing lawnmowers or cars. And if he couldn't do it, he knew a guy who could get it done. Again, this company was open 24/7 and was free. There was one other venture Leon was involved with. It was the Paquette Savings and Loan, but it had a very bad business plan for a financial institution. The money would only flow one way, out. Again, it was open 24/7 and there was no fees. Leon had an open wallet philosophy. He would open his wallet and would empty it out for any family member or friend in need. He would even give money to what I took as complete strangers that were down on their luck. It was funny, but I was with him numerous times when we found ourselves downtown. What I took as strangers would approach my dad. They would then ask my dad, often by name, for money, and after he would give them what he could out of his wallet, they would leave, and my dad would turn to me and tell me their story, their life story, and how they ended up in the situation they were in. At some point, not only my dad gave them money, but he also took the time to listen to them. But I digress. Let's get back to the bad driving stories. And again, way too many to share here. Leon's grandson tells him numerous times he was with his grandfather in the car and them getting pulled over by the police for some sort of traffic infraction. But somehow, Grandpa always got off with just a warning. Whatever Grandpa did to get out of these encounters was not necessarily passed on to his grandson. Because as a college student, the grandson found himself in need of being driven to class because he was also a naughty driver, but without the capability of getting off with just a warning. So Grandpa would go pick up his grandson, and as his grandson came out of the house, Grandpa would get out of the driver's side, throw his grandson the keys, and assist the grandson drive to school. This was not the intended outcome of the restrictions put on the grandson's driving. But the grandson could never tell his grandfather no, and all his grandfather knew was the grandson needed to get to school. So those were some of this Superman's kryptonite. Again, singing, telling jokes, and driving. Now I'll tell you some stories that show Leon's true character. As As a young man, he had some senior aunts and uncles that lived on farms. As their children left the farm, the chores still needed to get done. Leon would stay with them on their farms for extended periods of time to make sure the plantings got done, the harvesting completed, and the hay brought in. It needed to be done, and it was the right thing to do. Leon was not a man of much means, so what he could give was himself, the greatest gift any of us could ever give or receive. Once my dad got married and started a family, he no longer spent his money. He turned it directly over to the new financial officer of the partnership. It's not that he couldn't get whatever he wanted, but his family's needs and wants always came first. He never drove a brand new car. He didn't own a motorcycle, snow machine, or even a boat, even though he loved to fish. He really loved to fish. He always had his fishing rods in his car, never taken apart. The handle of the rod would rest on the front dash, rest across the back of the front seat, with the tip of the rod resting on the back window ledge. This way, the rod was easily accessible when he had breaks from his longshoreman job. He spent a lot of time in the slips of the port terminal fishing. He would set bait with a bobber on a rod, or two, or three, and he would cast daredevils with the other one. He also made time to take his grandkids, kids and nephews and nieces fishing whenever he could. Now, if Leon caught a prize fish, he would get very excited. And when you get excited, the proper thing to do is to share that excitement with others. He never owned a cell phone, he didn't have a Facebook account, and the only thing that he knew that tweeted was the birds in the tree. So Leon would bring these nice-sized fishes directly to the kids' grade or middle school and interrupt the classes going on so everyone could see. That was his social media, face to face. And just like receiving forgiveness from the police that pulled him over, the teachers were just as kind when he interrupted their classes. As a longshoreman, besides meeting the sailors from the States, Leon would meet sailors from around the world. Whether Leon understood their native tongue or not, he knew some of their basic wants and would help them out whenever he could. He would simply give them the keys to his car and give them directions to the Tommy Burns Viking Bar in Superior to get liquor and candy. And of course, ask nothing in return. How special of an individual was this to have so much faith in the goodness of humanity, especially in a rough work environment of the docks, that sometimes consisted of others that practiced just the opposite. Besides befriending the sailors, he probably knew every cook that worked in a galley. Leon loved a good meal, and some of those fish he caught in the slips never made it home. The vehicles my dad owned as a working man were of far less quality than when he was a single man. Leon would also leave his keys above the visor of his cars, so he had his car stolen numerous times. His grandson remembers talking about this with Grandpa, and Leon would simply and matter-of-factly state, well, they must have needed it more than me. That was the giver mentality he had. He also never carried a grudge. He once had a next-door neighbor that was going through a rough time in his life and chose liquor to numb the pain, and my dad to just place the anger on. This went on for a few years, even when my brother and myself intervened to put this neighbor in line. Then finally one day, this neighbor could no longer cut the grass on the hill that separated our yards. Leon, with no vengeance in his heart, and knowing this man had a need, and the right thing to do was to help, made sure this task was taken care of every week. Eventually, this man's heart healed, and he brought over a bottle of liquor and as a peace offering. Leon accepted with a smile and a handshake. Leon moved his family from the west end of Duluth up to the Piedmont area back in the late 70s, and was fortunate enough to have many very nice neighbors. They had big yards and long driveways. Leon loved to walk behind a lawnmower or a snowblower and would assist many neighbors. After his stroke, his neighbors had returned the favor. The family and Leon thanked them. Besides not having time to carry a grudge, Leon didn't argue, and he never argued with his wife. Never. It doesn't mean he did everything she told him, or not to do the things she told him not to do. There was one time in the beginning years after his stroke, when Leon still had some mobility and strength, that he was doing something his wife told him not to do. cut the grass on his riding mower in the farthest back of their yard. And he ended up getting the mower stuck in a rut and was unable to get the rider out. So when he came into the house, Mom started scolding him for doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. And then that's when it happened. He told his wife to shut up. She was shocked, not because of what he said, but because it was the only time after his stroke that he initiated a full sentence. You see, Leon could repeat things you said and even sing songs with you, which he often did with Jerry, his youngest son, who actually can sing. But he wasn't able to initiate the conversation with more than one word. Since what he said contained two words, shut and up, we are considering that a full sentence. My mom was amazed, happy, and found herself laughing. Leon did have some favorite go-to words after his stroke. Amen and bingo. Leon did use these words a little even before the stroke. Both of these words have a little religious fervor to them. But then he developed a third word. Well, it's actually four words, but when put together, have one meaning. And believe me, he didn't pick it up at church. So Leon would start out trying to initiate a conversation with you, and more likely than not, this word would come out of his mouth. At the same time, he would start shaking his head no, because it wasn't what he was trying to tell you. Leon would look you in the face, eye to eye, and start saying, fruit of the loom. After you composed yourself, you would try to guess what Leon was trying to tell you. If you guessed correctly, he would reply, bingo. If you didn't guess what he was trying to tell you, he would passionately end with, amen. I don't think Leon realized it, but he had a gift for being in the moment. And this allowed him to be forgiving and endearing to everyone he met, like the police that should have written him up for his bad driving, or the teachers he interrupted with his fish. Or volunteering at the church's youth center, where the kids called him Pops. Leon always did what needed to be done, that which is the right thing to do. As Leon approached retiring from being a longshoreman, he took up a second career as a church custodian. He worked at St. Francis Church in Superior and ended up at this very church for an over combined 15 years of service, in which he outlasted 3 priests that work here. At times, he was only paid for being part-time, but he always put in overtime hours. They say it's not work if you like what you're doing. And Leon loved cutting grass, shoveling snow, setting up for weddings and funerals, and cleaning up afterwards. His happiness was derived more from the people he interacted with than the task he was doing. He was not a 9-to-5 guy here. He literally would open up the doors in the morning and make sure the building was secure at night. There was a lot of things that needed to get done, so he did them. He was so much of a doer that I think Nike chose the wrong bald-headed person to be their brand spokesperson for the tagline, Just Do It. Now, Michael Jordan may be a successful spokesperson for Nike, but let me define success in a different light. As I would visit my parents' house as an adult, there was 3 separate times when I witnessed 3 separate neighborhood preschool kids press their face up against the mesh screen of my parents' back door and ask my mom, "Can Leon come out and play?" So if the most innocent and truthful of us, preschool-age kids, want you to spend time with them, I'll call that being successful in the things that matter the most. Through Leon's life work here on Earth, he was defined as a feeler. He might not have always told you how much he cared for you, but he showed it by all the things he did. He did what needed to be done, and that which was the right thing to do. A modified version of Maya Angelou's quote suited Leon's legacy. You may not remember all the things someone does for you, or what they may have said to you. What you will remember is how they made you feel. Scientists say the olfactory sense is a sense most tied to memory. But when it comes to people, I tend to agree with Maya Angelou here and say the sense of feeling, not touch, but feeling, is how memories of an individual are stirred and stored. Leon will be remembered very fondly by a lot of people for many years to come. In ending, Though Leon had some kryptonite issues, singing, telling jokes, and driving, he was still Superman in his family, because here on Earth, there still needs to be singing, there needs to be laughter, and there needs to be people caring for others. So let's leave Leon's service, and like Leon, just do it. Do what needs to be done. Do that which is the right thing to do. Please join the family for more story sharing in the lunch reception that follows this service. God bless Leon, God bless you, and thank you for being a part of my dad's life.